warning, the ideas discussed in this video are pretty radical. I mean, there's a 90% chance that you think they're too much for you. But if you stick with me, you'll at the very least find this philosophy pretty unique and interesting. Kinda like coming across a shiny Mankey in Pokemon Fire Red. You probably won't use him, but you nevertheless think he's special. But to show you how someone, and maybe even yourself, might be attracted to this philosophy, consider this moral dilemma. You have a friend named Carl, and Carl, he's seen better days. He's depressed, unmotivated, has no ambitions in life, and he just complains about everything. It's really hard for you to hang out with him. Then one day, he starts believing that a magical tuna fish named Keith is secretly the master of the universe and is creating life out of love for Carl. Carl then starts to see life as a gift from Keith, and he becomes more joyful and fun to be with. Now, you as his friend can inject Carl with this reason injection, and it would make him stop believing in Keith. Do you want your friend to be rational, or do you want your friend to find joy? More specifically in relation to this book, should we let rationalism keep us from achieving what we desire? What is up, my fellow Earthlings? It's Paul from Philosophy Tunes, and today we're diving into the book The Tragic Sense of Life by Miguel de Unamuno. Unamuno was a Spanish existentialist writer in the early 20th century who didn't just write philosophy, but wrote novels and essays and poems. He just wrote a lot, essentially. This book is considered his big philosophical magnum opus, and it's certainly one of the more unique philosophical works that I've read, so I highly recommend it. But you probably read the title and are wondering about this immortality business. What's going on here? Well, immortality of the soul is something Unamuno values very much. In fact, he thinks this desire not to die is the basis of all knowledge itself. The longing not to die, the hunger for personal immortality, the effort whereby we tend to persist indefinitely in our own being. This is the effective basis of all knowledge and the personal inward starting point of all human philosophy. Now, the obvious question here is whether you agree or not. Do you have a desire for personal immortality? This is a pretty complicated question because it feels like the answer might change over time. I'm relatively young and death is far away, so I don't really feel a strong desire for immortality, although I do know others my age who do. Let me know what you think in the comments. But one thing's for certain, and that's that Unamuno has a desire for immortality. He even talks about how he prefers an existence in hell rather than to not exist at all. It is better to live in pain than to cease to be in peace. The truth is that I could not believe in this atrocity of hell, of an eternity of punishment, nor did I see any more real hell than nothingness and the prospect of it. Now, you personally might not be on this whole immortality desire train, but Unamuno has a couple things to say on that matter that might persuade you. One of these arguments talks about a kind of pseudo-immortality that a lot of us chase after, a diet immortality if you will. And like diet sodas, they give you the illusion of the real thing, but with nothing really in it. This pseudo-immortality is not actually continuing your existence, but rather being remembered by others. When doubts invade us and cloud our faith in the immortality of the soul, a vigorous and painful impulse is given to the anxiety to perpetuate our name and fame, to grasp at least a shadow of immortality. And look, this isn't to say we desire some great fame and we have TMZ writing up articles about our sex lives for the world to see, but rather we just want to be remembered after we pass. Kinda reminds me of the Pixar film Coco, where you exist in the afterlife so long as people in the living world remember you. The difference here is that you won't be conscious after you pass, but will only really exist as a memory. That isn't what Unamuno wants. He wants actual immortality. And if you desire to be remembered, why not join him in a desire for actual immortality? What's funny is that a lot of Unamuno statues and busts exist out there in the world, and I'll try to visit one in Spain while I'm there in June. Even if his actual immortality is unknown to us now, he at least has his pseudo-immortality here on Earth. Now, one last thing I think is worth mentioning in Unamuno's writing on death is this little meditation section he has. And while I'll put the quote on the screen as usual, it might be kinda cool to close your eyes and follow along as I read it to you. Retire, reader, into yourself, and imagine a slow dissolution of yourself, the light dimming about you, all things becoming dumb and soundless, enveloping you in silence, the objects that you handle crumbling away between your hands, the ground slipping from under your feet, your very memory vanishing as if in a swoon, everything melting away from you into nothingness, and you yourself also melting away, the very consciousness of nothing, merely as the phantom harborage of a shadow, not even remaining to you. Sorry about that, I just needed some way to let you know that it's over. Now you might be wondering if this is really a desire held by everyone, or if Unamuno is really just personally obsessed with immortality. Well, this is actually a complicated question because many times he talks about our desire for immortality, but then he has chapter 1. In chapter 1 he talks about the philosopher behind the philosophy, not just as some objective, neutral being, but as a subjective, emotional human. The philosophies that are created are not disconnected from the philosophers that create them, but rather, the personality of the philosopher informs their philosophy. Schopenhauer is an easy example of this, and that video is coming next week. But if we look throughout the history of philosophy, we definitely can see ways that the life of the philosopher influences the philosophy. Our philosophy, that is, our mode of understanding or not understanding the world and life, springs from our feeling towards life itself. And life, like everything effective, has roots in subconsciousness, perhaps in unconsciousness. So okay, it's somewhat unclear if this desire for immortality is just Unamuno speaking, or if it's more general. Regardless, even if we think of him just speaking for himself, that doesn't stop those who also have this desire from coming along this train of his. But okay, say you do have this desire for immortality, but isn't any belief in the afterlife or immortality unreasonable? Isn't it irrational to believe in a god and an immortality of the soul? Unamuno himself even dedicates an entire chapter to debunking attempts to rationally justify God and immortality. Should we then just pack it up and be reasonable here, giving up our desire for immortality? No, I do not submit to reason, and I rebel against it, and persist in creating by the energy of faith my immortalizing God, and enforcing by my will the stars out of their course. For if we had faith as a grain of mustard seed, we should say to that mountain, remove hence, and it would remove, and nothing would be impossible to us. Remember at the beginning of the video when I said this philosophy might be too radical for some? This is what I'm referring to. Unamuno is not going to let reason get in the way of this desire, and it almost seems like he's going to rebel against reason. Now that doesn't mean reason is completely out of the picture. Unamuno sees a war between reason and feeling, or life. And instead of a compromise or letting reason get completely destroyed, it seems like Unamuno wants to just embrace this conflict. Regardless, it seems pretty clear that Unamuno greatly favors feeling and life over reason. But before you immediately write him off because you want to sound smart and reasonable on the internet, there are some things I want to mention. Firstly, like I tried to illustrate in the introduction, if you have a desire where pursuing that desire is extremely beneficial for your life, should you just give it up if it's unreasonable? Think about love, for instance. One could make the argument that love is extremely irrational. I mean, you fall in love with someone and yet that person is a changing, fluid person. So who exactly are you falling in love with? Plus, that love is eventually going to end either through a breakup or death. So isn't it irrational to be in love? And yet we all, or at least some of us, see the advantages of being in love. Secondly, there's a kind of life-affirming element here. The reasonable atheist might say to the religious person, wow, you're wasting your life abiding by all these rules based on theology. But if we're solely concerned about limiting our life, then wouldn't that reasonable atheist be limiting their life by abiding by reason? Unamuno goes so far as to even criticize Nietzsche as not life-affirming enough. So yeah, our desire for immortality can't be satisfied through reason, so we have to be irrational and start believing in gods and afterlives to do so. But do the pros of these beliefs outweigh the cons of being unreasonable? I mean, what do you really lose? Being called stupid and unreasonable on the internet? Is that really worth giving up the solace you might get through the belief in immortality? What are your thoughts? I'll end with this pretty killer quote near the end of chapter 6. And if, when at last I die out altogether, then I shall not have died out of myself. That is, I shall not have yielded myself to death, but my human destiny will have killed me. Unless I come to lose my head, or rather my heart, I will not abdicate from life. Life will be wrested from me. And that's our video on Unamuno's tragic sense of life. Even if you don't agree with him, with that first chapter you could also view this philosophy as a story of a man who so strongly desired immortality that he made a whole philosophy for it. It's a great read regardless, so I highly recommend it. Plus, what else are you gonna do over the summer? Go to the country fair and eat deep fried butter? Now that's a way to never become immortal. If you enjoyed the video, then like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.